It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by ANZ Home Loans for financial well-beings.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Real Estate Breakfast, talking your real estate news at breakfast time. We do it 7 days a week. You're going to hear all of the commentators, the experts, the economists, you name it. If they're important, we are talking to them. And it's a Wednesday morning, October the 16th today. Now, the number of first home buyers in Australia has unfortunately declined, with many giving up on the idea entirely of property ownership. And we should be worried about this. Despite a 1% rise in home loan values in August, the Real Estate Institute of Australia highlights that first home buyer activity actually dropped by 1.5%. Rising property prices are to blame. Higher interest rates, of course, are to blame. It all makes it very difficult, if not impossible, for young Australians to get their foot into the real estate property market. It's stressful. They feel literally like the mouse on the never-ending circle cage. They are caged out of the market. And our next guest this morning on our Wednesday is the REIA President Leanne Pilkington. And good morning to you, Leanne. Welcome to the Real Estate Breakfast. Great to have you on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So how long have you been the president there?
I have been the president since November last year, so coming up to a year.
And if we look at top of mind, top of plate issues, what have you got going on at the moment? Obviously, this one's one of them, first home buyers, but what else?
Well, we know that despite the government telling us repeatedly that they had no intention of bringing negative gearing back on the agenda, we then hear the Prime Minister come out and say, oh, well, Treasury are modelling. And so the Greens are holding up the Help to Buy legislation, asking for the government to have a look at changing the negative gearing and capital gains tax. So that's a real issue. Why governments think it is sensible to make changes like that to discourage investment at a time when we're in a housing crisis is absolutely beyond me. The government know that it's the wrong thing to do, but the Greens are putting a lot of pressure on them. So that's a live issue for us right now. And also we've got the anti-money laundering regulations coming in. They don't come in until March 2026. However, there's a lot that needs to be sorted through in the lead up to that. So that's a really interesting conversation we've got going on right now as well.
Yeah, with that piece about the money laundering, one of the aspects that we've talked about is the scamming. And I guess with your members, that is something that comes up probably more than we would like, right? With the amount of people losing hundreds of thousands of dollars, being duped into making a payment, and it's not to the right appropriate person.
It actually happens much more frequently than I think most people realise. Yeah, it's a real problem.
Back to that core issue, first home buyers, you've warned that affordability challenges are sidelining first home buyers as deposit requirements have significantly increased over the past decade. I throw that analogy up like the mouse on the wheel, and it's unfortunate that we've got to sort of talk about that sort of analogy in this equation.
It is really difficult for young people to get on the property treadmill, if you will. But I also think that some of them are starting to feel hopeless. And I would encourage anybody who has got first home buyers in their orbit, I would encourage them to go and see a mortgage broker. Even if they know they can't actually afford to buy anything now, what the mortgage brokers can do is help direct people for the planning process. They can go through what levels all of the incentives are at. They can talk about what your options are from an amount of deposit that's required. There's a lot more options out there than a lot of people are aware. And I just don't want young people to think this is absolutely impossible, because it is possible if you get good advice, but it might take, a couple of years of planning and saving, but get the advice you need now. Don't wait until you think you've got enough money in the bank to get the advice, because you'd be surprised the difference it can make.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice because, the whole knowledge base with the mortgage brokers, they know the market, they know exactly what you require. And sometimes people don't think that they've got enough money. They go and see a mortgage broker, Leanne, and hello, suddenly, wow, we can actually get into the housing market.
That's exactly right, because there are a number of incentives for first-time buyers, and they change quite frequently. So the mortgage brokers are on top of all of that. So it's definitely worth a conversation. Just things like knowing how much money, too much money in the bank, you can't qualify for some of the incentives. There's just lots of tips that they can give you that will make it a less daunting experience.
Yeah, and just talking about less daunting, analysis by money.com.au, that tells us that young Australians now need a deposit 99% larger than 2012 to buy a home. I found this quite staggering. Back in 2012, a first home buyer would need around almost $49,000 for a 10% deposit based on the Australian Bureau of Statistics dwelling values. Today, that figure has now jumped to over 97 grand. It's just amazing how quickly it rises.
Yeah, it's a significant amount of money. It takes a long time to save that. Obviously, house prices have escalated really dramatically throughout COVID. In some jurisdictions like Sydney, those prices have continued to increase. Other places like Melbourne, for example, some of the prices have come back, particularly in the unit market. The problem with house prices is lack of supply. Everybody's talking about lack of supply. The government are talking about what they need to do, the number of houses that they need to build to positively impact that, but they're not building them. And we have seen in Melbourne prices come back in some markets because they were the ones who actually completed more supply in the last sort of 10 years than the other states and the other capitals.
Yes, the supply is a massive headache and a problem for everybody. We'll talk about that supply and maybe a few ideas around that after this.
Decode the property market with insider knowledge and insights to better navigate your real estate journey on the Real Estate Podcast.
Well, here is something pretty interesting reported on by the ABC yesterday. Some interesting numbers. In 1981, nearly 55% of Australians aged between 25 to 29 owned a home. Now, today that figure has dropped all the way back to 35%. So 55% in 1981, 35% today. And while older Australians, particularly those over 70, still maintain similar ownership rates as in the past, they largely purchased before the real estate boom, which makes a hell of a difference. And the alarming trend shows that fewer younger people are entering the market, which is what we're talking about this morning. And the gap is expected to widen with future generations. And you can see where this is going to absolutely snowball. It's going to be a significant financial challenge in retirement. Of course, if you're 25 years of age, that is on the horizon. Many people don't worry about it, but it is going to become a deepening societal divide based on, you guessed it, property ownership.
We talk to the most knowledgeable real estate experts across Australia every day from 6 a.m.
And it is a Real Estate Wednesday today, talking to REIA President Leanne Pilkington, and a bit of a spotlight on those first-time buyers. Very, very stressful. Yeah, that supply, just talking about that before the break, Leanne, what a massive headache, what an issue it is. We've talked about modular building our way out of this crisis. Simon Kustenmacher has actually been on the Breakfast podcast talking about full upscaling of factories that can turn out meaningful numbers of modular homes. Should we be investing in this technology at scale is probably the question I'd love to ask you.
Well, we definitely need to be looking at it very closely because what we're doing right now is not working. We are not building the number of houses the government have pledged to build. And part of the problem is that we don't have enough tradespeople. So if there's other ways, other methods of building that has less of a need for specialised trades, we definitely need to explore it. Our housing approvals are down, but in particular the unit market, something like 12% down on the last quarter for approvals. So that's just telling me that the supply is going to continue to be a problem down the track.
Yeah, because we talk about the mouse circle for the first-time buyers, but that mouse circle is also happening at a political level. There is just too much talk about we're going to build so many homes. The problem with it is that it's so far off the mark that it's just hollow and people just get so disillusioned. And I think where Simon is coming from is with AI now, if money was spent into these massive factories and turning them out at scale, suddenly you actually start to turn the corner. The numbers look actually feasible.
Yeah, it's a really interesting idea. And as I say, I think that we need to explore all of the different possibilities right now because what we're doing is clearly not working. And that's not changing either. To see the approval numbers for particularly for units, which is the more affordable range of property, to see those numbers falling just means that this crisis is going to continue.
And you know these pods that are getting quite highly spec'd, very attractive. I have people say to me, well, they're not a house. You know, people can get quite defensive. My only argument with that is if you look at different markets like Sydney, we've highlighted this kitchlet, which has got the toilet next to the kitchen, and you got about 20 square metres. I mean, it's actually half the size of some of these pods.
I know some of it, it's quite remarkable, some of the properties that you do see advertised, isn't it? And the size of them. So yeah, again, why not explore what might be possible? Where we are with technology today is just absolutely phenomenal. So we need to get better at letting that technology help us solve our challenges.
Yeah, so if we put the rose-tinted glasses on, Leanne, look towards next year, Q1 and Q2, how do you think that the start of 2025 may or may not go for all of us looking at the real estate industry intensely?
Well, I think that it's likely we will be seeing a rate cut sometime early, hopefully first quarter of the new year. But of course, the risk that comes with a rate cut is that traditionally when rates get cut, prices go up. So that is something that we do need to be concerned about. But we are being told that Sydney is a buyer's market right now. So definitely if you are in a position to be buying property, I would be looking to do it.
All right, well, we'll wrap it up there. Enjoy your Wednesday. Thanks for coming on to the Real Estate Breakfast this morning, and good luck in that probably very challenging role.
Thank you very much.
We dive deep into topics like buying, selling, investing, and maximising your property's value. From mortgage advice to the latest property data, your real estate journey starts here.
And this is part of Melbourne's problem. Melbourne had an oversupply in the pipeline of units, which has diluted the property market because we've got so many of those units. And when we're looking at median price, we take into account the value of all property in an area.
CoreLogic, they brought out some numbers recently. Melbourne, 6th most expensive city in Australia. Look at who is number 3. It is your perennial favourite, Adelaide.
It's not a shock to me, but I think it's a shock to many other people to find that Melbourne is so far down the list when typically we always saw Sydney and Melbourne at the top of the table and Adelaide and Perth really at the bottom of that table. Tasmania was for a long time but came through with excessive growth in Hobart over a protracted period of time.
We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.